Welcome to Together, a higher ed podcast where we bring you stories, insights, and experiences from voices across the higher education sector. I'm Chase Haygood, the Vice Provost for Student Success at the University of Utah. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by my friend, my colleague, my mentor, Dr. Naomi J. Norman. Naomi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
We're so glad to have you. Naomi has been on campus for a couple of days, having all kinds of great conversations with any number of folks, so much so that I think you've lost part of your voice along the way. I have the privilege for knowing you for quite a while.
Yes.
I think it's fair to say. An incredible journey that you've had in higher education that it's been a pleasure to be a small part of a portion of it. I'd love for you to share a little bit with our listeners what that journey has looked like. What has it meant as a faculty member, as an administrator, as somebody who I know cares really deeply about students and about higher education?
So it's been amazing. I showed up at the University of Georgia in 1980. Take that in. 1980. I was a newly minted PhD, brand new assistant professor. I had never taught in graduate school. I had no idea what I was doing. So I started in 1980, spent most of my career as teaching faculty in the classics department at Georgia. I am a classical archeologist, which I think you know. I dig up ancient Greeks and Romans. Great life, great profession, loved every second of it. I would take students with me to the excavation every summer, so I like to think that I was doing experiential learning before it became a thing in higher ed.
Yeah.
And then it's like when you're in the classics department, it's very small. You don't have that many colleagues, and you don't have that many students. So the kinds of things I wanted to do for students at Georgia, I couldn't do from my position as department head. So I decided to apply for a job in the office of the Vice President for Instruction as the Associate VP, charged primarily with student success initiatives. And so I spent the last 8 years of my career doing that and loving every moment of that as well. I feel very fortunate that I have loved every part of my job for 44 years.
I love it.
Which I think a lot of people can't say.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So before you came to Georgia, you were at the University of Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
Go Blue. Before that, Bryn Mawr.
Mm-hmm.
You tell us a little bit about what drew you into higher ed? Because you're a native of the great state of Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
What took you to Bryn Mawr and then off to Michigan?
Well,
if you don't mind sharing.
So in the 6th grade, I started taking Latin. And at that time, Latin textbooks were different than they are now. In many ways, they're still awful, but they were really awful back when I was in the 6th grade. You had all the things you had to learn and memorize about the language, and then there would be these intriguing photographs on the page, but there was never a caption. So I never knew what I was looking at, but I kept on looking at the pictures and thinking to myself, that's what I want to know. I know I need to learn Latin, but I want to bring those pictures to life. I want to find out who those people are who are speaking Latin. And so that kind of drew me into archaeology as opposed to straight classics. I was fortunate enough that I was able to dual enroll at Creighton University, where they had strong classics and they had archaeology courses. And so I'm getting ready to graduate from high school, and I'm thinking, well, where do I go to study archaeology, to become an archaeologist? I sat there with my college counselor, and we went through innumerable, remember the days where everything was a big book?
Yeah.
Went through all those big books, and Bryn Mawr just seemed like the place. I didn't appreciate Omaha, Nebraska when I was a kid. I was anxious to leave. As I grew older and came back, it's a fantastic town, but you're not going to become an archaeologist there.
Yeah.
So I went to Bryn Mawr, kind of validated my choice that, yes, this is what I wanted to do, which also meant that I needed to get a higher degree. So I went to Michigan, loved Michigan, except for the, snowbanks that were taller than I was, and got my PhD in classical, archaeology. Lived in Athens, Greece for a couple of years doing it. Got the job at Georgia. University was very good to me. They funded my first excavation, which hardly ever happens, and that was it.
Yeah.
I was hooked, and I enjoyed the fact that I hooked a lot of students along the way. Students who went on to become bankers, lawyers, doctors, whatever, but they had this spark of being interested in the ancient world. And, they still contact me and, Naomi, did you see this on the news?
Yeah.
So it's, what other profession is going to give you that kind of gratification?
Yeah. I think you'd be hard pressed to find one. That's my own belief.
Yeah,
I
mine
think it's
too.
something we share. Along the way, because it has been a pleasure coming to know you as, again, friend and colleague and co-author and co-presenter on too many conferences to count at this point. And we're going to get to reacting to the past in a minute, because I'd love to chat with you about that, about its origins, about where it stands today, and maybe where its future could go. But before that, I'm mindful, and as I chat with a lot of different folks, there seems to be almost for everyone like a couple of faculty members or mentors that emerged along the way. I'm wondering if the same is true for you, either at Bryn Mawr or at Michigan or both, or even in sixth grade in that Latin class, which I'd never heard that. If that Latin teacher sparked something for you or created, acknowledged, noticed, are there those folks in your journey as well?
Oh, my goodness, yes.
Sure.
I mean, so much research. We know that one special person who cares can make a world of difference.
Yeah.
So my Latin teacher, she was a hoot. Her name was Miss Campbell. She had blue-white hair. She doused herself in Joy perfume every day.
Love it.
Which meant that, we didn't have air conditioning in my school, so she would open the windows and the bees would come to her Joy perfume. And so she had a bee catcher. One student was assigned to drive all the bees away. So she was a hoot.
Never acknowledging that it is, in fact, her perfume that's drawing them
exactly.
in. Right? Got it. So she was magnetic in that sense of, at least for the bees.
Yeah, but I think there were two people at Bryn Mawr who were the two people who led me to believe that I could do more and that they were interested in me and interested in how I wanted to pursue a career. And they were Bruni Ridgway, who just died like a week ago.
Oh, I'm
But
sorry for your loss.
yeah, she was incredible. She wrote like maybe 10 different books on Greek sculpture. She was a powerhouse in the classroom. She could just stand up there and talk and bring all that material to life. It was mesmerizing. And I thought, if I could be 1/5 of a teacher and scholar that she is, I would be so proud. And the other guy, the other person at Bryn Mawr was Kyle Phillips. He was a expert on Greek pottery, and he invited me to join my very first excavation.
How old were you then? Do you remember? On your first excavation?
I was a junior in college.
Nice. In what country? Do you know where you traveled to do that excavation?
Oh, yeah, it was Italy.
In Italy.
Yeah, so I mean, how can you argue with that?
Oh, right. Yes, I will go.
Yes, yeah. It was in Tuscany, and the scenery was gorgeous.
Yeah.
The food was amazing, and the site was incredible.
Like those pages in that 6th grade Latin book. Right.
But I didn't need captions because I was beginning to write the captions myself.
I love it.
I knew who those people were.
Yep. Well, as somebody who's observed your teaching, much more than 1/5, Naomi. Much more than 1/5. I mean, the ability-
but you never saw Bruni.
Well, I don't need to see her. I don't need to see her. Okay, so I want to shift gears if I can slightly, talk a little bit about the course of your career at a powerhouse R1 university in the Southeast. Recent New York Times piece, I think it was like, hang on, Harvard and Yale, all the kids are headed down. It was either New York Times or Wall Street Journal. All the kids are headed south. They're headed south for a great education and a lower cost and all that. You have seen that institution, one that I know well, perhaps not as well as you do, but I know it pretty well. You've seen it change over time. I'm wondering from that, if you could share a couple ideas and thoughts about where we are right now in public higher education in America, like the great public, universities. What excites you about that? Do you have any trepidations? Do you have any thoughts about where we should be headed next? What strikes you right now about the state of American higher education?
Well, there are so many things I could talk about, but I'm going to talk about money.
Okay.
If we really want to accomplish what the idea of higher ed was, and in my mind still is, but it's becoming fuzzy in other people's minds, we have to have enough financial support for students so that we can recruit students from the widest possible spectrum. Higher ed is not for the elites. Higher ed is for everybody. And if we can't support those students financially, they're not even going to come. And so at Georgia, we've made great strides in the last 10 years to provide that kind of support for students who need it.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of what's at top of my mind right now, because so many people want to disrupt higher ed, defund higher ed. All of those things will eventually mean that we don't have robust higher ed. And then I fear for the generations coming up and their ability to, make a real difference in the world, their ability to have successful lives, their ability to not only get a job, but get a job that they love.
Yeah. I'm mindful too of your own discipline into the ancient world, into antiquity, and you then extend it all the way forward in terms of what that through line or that moving line could look like then from the origins of democracy, small d democracy, all the way through now. I think for both classicists as well as historians, the thinking is that it takes an educated leadership class, but also educated citizenry to really see democracy thrive. So yeah, on the defunding piece or on the lack of or decline of across, not just in Utah or in Georgia, but across all of American higher ed, then the question is, well, doesn't democracy in some ways depend on people being on education, primary, secondary, higher ed, and the like?
Mm-hmm. I think it does.
Yeah.
I can say that very glibly,
Sure.
but deep in my soul,
Yeah.
I think it does, simply because I believe in the value of higher education for everybody.
Yeah.
And so states that are slashing budgets of their public institutions of higher learning, we are shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah.
We have to have an educated, informed, curious citizenry. And, where do you nurture curiosity best? I think in institutions of learning.
Yeah.
They're all about sparking curiosity and finding answers.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. So that raises a question for me then, and on the aforementioned reacting to the past, but not just that. You've led efforts. I've seen it up close. Was fortunate to be part of some of the teams that you put together at the University of Georgia, trying to think through what are the best kinds of ways or the best approaches to sparking that kind of joy of learning, of deep learning, of an inquisitive kind of mind or a curious mind for students. Could put it all under the label of active learning or experiential learning if you want to. You talk a little bit about what that journey looked like or what those experience like, the difficulty of it, and we'll get to a question in a moment that'll be like, how do we drive kind of change? But from your experience, both as a faculty member, as a department chair, however many layers we want to go, right? As somebody who just cares deeply about higher education, the things that you've seen work well for student learning between faculty and with the student, for the student, both sides of the desk, as I've heard you say on multiple occasions. What are some of those kinds of initiatives or innovations that you've seen of late that you think have had impact, or they have the potential for even higher impact?
So I think one of the big shifts that I've seen is the shift away from nonstop lecturing to doing some lecturing, but also getting students actively involved in what's being discussed, which if they don't have any hands-on experience or if they're not actively involved in anything, unless you're an incredibly talented lecturer, I think a lot of students walk out the door, I've checked that box, let me move on.
Yeah.
Whereas what I'm interested in is giving my students some kind of foundation so when they don't become classical archaeologists,
Right.
whatever they become, they still maintain some interest. Now, I've had a long journey. I reinvented myself as a teacher at least 3 different times.
Sure.
Because as I said, I had never taught in graduate school. I didn't know what to do. I just sort of, produced the kind of syllabus that I received as a student. Very strict, very punitive. My first syllabus was incredibly mean. It got meaner throughout my first decade of teaching. And then I sat down and I looked at my syllabus and I thought, I wouldn't want to take this class from this woman.
Yeah.
And so I just sort of changed my perspective to make sure I was always thinking, this class is not about me. This class is about you, the student.
Yeah.
If I don't keep them in the forefront of my mind, I am not serving them.
Yeah. And because I've observed your teaching, which was just wonderful. I mean, it was a great opportunity for me. I was working mostly in faculty development work at the time, but trying to think about, what that looks like in the first year or in the general education courses, and then in the upper division or the major specific courses. Can you talk a little bit about if anything differentiates that? So 2 questions. Does anything differentiate your teaching, or even when you're teaching in the graduate classroom, right? Master's students, PhD students, whatever. How you approach the differentiation of that, if it's a gen ed course versus, let's just say, an upper division course or a classics major or an archaeology major. And then that's the kind of first prompt. The second one, though, is like, as you talk about reinventing yourself, when I've heard you say that, it strikes me as it takes a lot of kind of self-reflection and awareness to do that. And I'm wondering at any of those kind of pivot points, if there was anything that was driving it, that you would look back in retrospect and say, you sat down and looked at the syllabus and you said, God, who wants to take a class with this woman? Like, who is this person, right? I mean, so that could be one pivot point. If there was another pivot point as you advance through your career, because we got a lot of faculty or staff who will watch or listen, and I'm wondering if some of them might be finding themselves in a similar kind of moment. I wouldn't call it a crisis of identity, but I'd say a little bit of like consciousness raising. Like, what is this that I'm trying to accomplish?
Right. Is this the teacher I really want to be?
Yeah.
Am I affecting the change in my students that I assumed I was doing?
Right.
And until I shifted my focus from me to the student,
Yeah.
I was never going to accomplish that. I was never going to be Bruni Ridgway.
Yeah.
And so, I just kept on, you read the room,
Yeah.
and you can tell when students are bored. Hell, I was bored.
Yeah.
I mean, I was boring myself
Yeah.
by delivering, the same course in the same way over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, if I love this subject, if I'm bored, I can't even imagine how bored they are. So I had to shift the way I taught.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the problems that we as faculty often have is that we think of our course as a black box. The course resides in this box, and it has no connections to any other courses that a student is taking. And if that's what we all insist on doing over and over again, we're never going to reap the benefits of having a gen ed curriculum and then having an upper division curriculum. We need to help students see those places where your course connects to other courses that they've taken in the past, or when they get to a course in the future, they can see those connections. Oh, I see how that works. Yeah. I see how my freshman comp class, I now understand what they were trying to do.
Yeah. Not just depending on the student to organically make the transfer of knowledge happen, but these kind of empowered pathways.
You got to help them.
Right. Through curricular design, and then what I hear you saying or suggesting is that the faculty has a role to play in that too, right?
Yes.
It's not, I'm going to design this course that, although no doubt there could feel as though a lot of power in, I'm going to design this course and it's hermetically sealed. No one else can touch it, and I'm doing my thing over here. But it's a disservice then to the student who, and we've all had that experience. To your earlier point about it's not about me, it's about you, the student, and then designing curriculum in the one course, the section of the course, and then it's interconnections, the interweaving of that for the learning experience for a student.
And it's very difficult
Yeah,
for them to do it on their own.
right.
So if we don't provide some guideposts along the way, many of them will never get there.
Fair enough. Yeah.
And I think, another issue is I'm a firm believer in Gen Ed. If it's done the way it was envisioned to work, that we need to make sure that the Gen Ed classes we teach are actually yielding the results that we want. And by results, I'm not talking about grades.
Yeah.
I'm talking about results. I'm talking about, I'm never going to be a math major, but it's useful for me to understand how mathematics work and how mathematicians think.
Yep. That's a really, really good point. Wherein, so I'm going to connect that with then what I imagine, knowing you, was perhaps one pivot point. Maybe I don't know if it was one of the three, or I think you had said three kind of pivot. You reinvented at least three times, so I'm thinking three pivot points. Let me ask it. I'm wondering if one of those is when you get linked up with people like Mark Carnes at Columbia, at Barnard College, and some others, as this notion of reacting to the past begins to take shape. And if it is, I'd love for you to tell some of that story.
Yeah, that was my third pivot.
Okay.
That changed my teaching forever. I had made really good strides beforehand, but I had never entertained the notion that students can reap huge rewards when they are literally in charge of their own education. One of the hallmarks of reacting is that, you set the historic foundation or the economic foundation or whatever is pertinent to the game, and then you step to the back of the room and students actually take over. They understand all of a sudden their agency, which we do a really good job of hiding from them that they have agency. They discover that. They discover how to work together in teams where, they don't know these students to begin with. But boy, the students who have played a reacting game, they know each other in a much deeper way because they have to talk to each other all the time, inside class and outside class. So talk about a sense of belonging.
Right.
There it is.
Yeah. So for viewers and listeners, this reacting to the past kind of model or approach to teaching, am I right to say game-based, students are in charge, they get roles, pivotal point in the past, and the past could be last year, all the way back to 403 BCE, of which you're a co-author on the Threshold of Democracy game. And for any number of either days or up to weeks, they're playing a game where the lecture, maybe a micro lecture happens to get them stood up, and then the game is on, and you're there guiding, stewarding, shepherding in student or office hours, probably more frequently than you ever had before. And then they come to a conclusion, and then you help them unpack it through a postmortem. Like, how was it different? Why was it different? Can you share some of the most you've told? I have heard a couple of stories over the time that we've known each other of the impact that you've seen that have, not just for you and that third pivot for your career, that changed or reshaped, right, how you saw your role, but impact that you've seen for students. A couple of students that just, you don't know that perhaps they wouldn't have got to where they got in your class
Without that game.
Without the game, yep.
So the example that springs immediately to mind is in a third semester Greek class. You know, third semester is when the rubber meets the road. You've learned all this grammar in the first 2 semesters, and then you're actually confronted with ancient texts, and you have to learn how to read them.
Right.
Not decode them, read them. So it was a small class. I think it was about 16 students. Everyone was white except for one young gentleman who was an African American, and he was struggling. He was struggling constantly. And, sending a student like that to tutoring is helpful, but I don't know if it's going to help that student make the leap. He desperately wanted to read Greek because he wanted to be able to read the Bible in one of its original languages. So I didn't want to lose him.
Yeah.
Because he desperately wanted to learn Greek for a personal reason that would enrich his life.
Yeah.
So,
the motivation was there.
Right.
Like the reason to be in class, to do the hard work, which we know that internal drive and motivation is going to, if he could get there, like that, it sounds like you could potentially leverage that motivation, and he could get there, right?
Yeah. So what?
Hopefully.
Third semester Greek class is a slog for a lot of students because it's all of a sudden a different kind of learning environment that we probably have not properly prepared them for. So he's struggling, and everybody's exhausted. And I thought, well, we're going to play a short version of the Athens game. And so we did. I have students randomly select their role because that's the way it was done in antiquity. Important public offices were held by people whose the equivalent of a slip of paper came up. So he got a role. I don't really remember what he played, but he transformed. He was ruling that game. He was channeling, Johnny Cash and Aretha Franklin and everybody you can imagine. And he was just rocking it and having the time of his life.
Yeah.
So he then came out of that game, and he still struggled because it's hard material.
Right.
But he was no longer struggling with the idea, could he do it? He knew he could do it. And then the other thing that I saw happen was that all of the other students in the class who had basically been ignoring him saw him in the game, and their evaluation of him changed completely. And when the game was over and we returned to Greek grammar, he was part of the group.
Yeah.
Which I thought was pretty fantastic.
No doubt. Breaking down some barriers that, is it fair to say that without the game, they would have just persisted?
I think so.
They would have, maybe by week, if it was a 15 weeks, maybe by week 13, he picks up a friend or something like that along the way.
So it turns out he was in a gospel choir at UGA, so he invited all of us to attend their concert, and, over 90% of the class was there.
Nice. Again, back to your point, sense of belonging, social connectedness, taking, community from inside the classroom, if you can get it, if you can help it shape, take form, take shape, and then extending it further beyond the walls of the classroom. That's an amazing story. A really, really amazing story.
Is that the story you were thinking of?
That's the story I was thinking of. That's the story I was thinking of. I think the ability, as you and I both have seen, reacting, just reshape, like, and in some ways, cause us to have anybody who's any instructor who's brave enough, and it does take, I think, some bravery and a little bit of like, well, I guess we'll just see how this goes. That I've seen, and our research demonstrates that people can have likely a career-altering kind of experience that may, in fact, defy even the experiences that we had. Who, I mean, I like to think about people who go on to get a PhD. Instructors can do almost anything, put any amount of books in front of them, test them in any number of ways, and they're going to figure out a way to be quite persistent to get along the way, right, to get further along. But that isn't most of our students, right? I mean, the demographics just do not shape out that way. And 1.5 to 3%, something like that, will get a master's and a PhD in America. That was the case a couple of years ago. Like, that's not the vast majority of the people who sit in our classrooms in undergraduate education. That's not what's motivating them, right? So it's treating them as we were eager to learn and making some assumptions that they have the same kind of motivation, they have the same kind of passion for the particular topic. To your earlier point, if you love this topic and you're getting bored by the instructional approach, probably 98% of the students in the classroom, you look out and their eyes are open, but they're clearly asleep, right? Awesome. And the work that you've done, Naomi, I'll just say this. I've seen it up close, the hundreds of thousands of lives of students and peers. The work that you've done in faculty development, the work that you're now leading in the governor's teaching fellows at the Institute, the McBee Institute of Higher Education at Georgia, the passion that you have for really good teaching. I've got two final questions. How would you define good teaching? You're like, how long do we have on this podcast?
Yeah,
Chase?
exactly. I was expecting a softball, and instead I got a fastball.
Right. And you can break it apart. Like, what are the best facets of it? What does it look like? What are the outcomes for faculty, for students, whomever? What are the core elements of it?
So for me, I've said this before, keeping the student at the forefront of our mind. Another key aspect is we have to meet students where they are. We have to teach the students who are in our class, not the students that we were.
Yeah.
We have to engage them. We have to tap into the things that they are already interested in and find a connection between that interest and what the subject matter of the course is. So again, it goes back to my notion that too many of us view our course as residing in a black box. If you don't know what a student is already interested in, you're never going to make that connection.
Right.
You have to create some kind of rapport, some kind of connection with those students, which means you have to talk to them. How many times have we seen a professor walk into class, the minute class begins, go to the front, immediately start lecturing, class is over, and they walk out?
Yeah.
You're never going to build any kind of rapport with that student. You're never going to be able to make those connections. So, going back to the idea that one person can make a huge difference in a student's life, try to be that one person.
What's your outlook on, because you have a really great vantage point. You've been in the classroom, you've served in administration at UGA, you're working with faculty who I think it's fair to say they're in a fellows program because they care. What's your outlook on the number of folks who are at least interested in what good teaching could be for both them and for their students.
So, a lot of faculty are in fact very interested,
Yeah.
but so often the message that they get is don't worry about your teaching now. Get your research done, get promoted, get tenured, and then maybe go back to it, which is, exactly backwards. You should worry about your teaching at the very beginning because your ability to communicate your discipline, you know, that's key. It's important.
Yeah.
We're research faculty. We have to be able to tell people what it is that we have discovered.
Yeah.
And one way to hone that skill is to be a good teacher and to learn to talk to students about the subject, keeping open the possibility that they might get very interested.
Yeah. Perhaps even they may teach you something, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, I've shared with you before, like as an early Americanist, I've lost track of how many times I ask students, to read Thomas Paine's Common Sense. I've read it, because it's a fascinating piece of, you could call it propaganda, you could call it any number of things, but ephemera from the early, the Revolutionary and then into the early Republic in America. I think questions that students will ask of anything that we assign them, artwork, music, text, whatever, questions that they may ask that emanate from a different kind of perspective that through our own education we have lost to some degree because it's been refined in a different direction through specialization and through, how many times can you read a text and
Still not get it.
right, or begin to get the multiple kinds of meanings then that can come out of it. So, can I ask you? And this is a sub question. This is kind of a part B to that. It occurs to me as I was listening to you, Naomi, that part of it seems to be. Here's a theory, and tell me what you think. I could be totally wrong, and I will accept that from you, like turning the lights on in my office. Which for folks, I don't like my lights on in my office, and the only person who can do that is Naomi. We've discovered. So here's the question. Do you think that there's a relationship then between good teaching, or perhaps the lack thereof, with the experience that a student might have at a university or a college, with the declining kind of trust or care or support for higher education?
I think there is a connection, but I think there are all kinds of other aspects
Sure.
that are bubbling up
Sure.
to erode trust
Yeah.
in higher ed.
Yeah.
But if we can't help our students
Yeah.
kind of get from your A to Z,
Yeah.
who's going to help them?
Right. If it's not us, then who?
Right,
Yeah. If it's not now, then when?
right.
Right? Awesome. On that, our last question. The question I warned you will make the sound on the board there. You've seen so much of where higher education, your teaching and research careers of faculty member began in 80, and here we are in 2024. When you said yes to sit down, I was like, Naomi's sense of how we go about answering this question will truly be unique. No pressure. How do we create the kind, or kinds, plural, of lasting, transformative change together? Like, how do we do it? How have you seen it done? What are the things we should avoid? This podcast exists because we're intrigued about multiple perspectives on that core set of doing the work together. What advice do you have for us? Like, again, things that you've seen that did or didn't work, things that you wish people would be doing, but you don't see anybody doing it.
So Another hardball question. Thank you so much, Chase. You know, I returned to my black box.
Yeah.
We got to break down that black box and not just make disciplinary connections between our course and somebody else's course, but we need to break down that black box and nurture faculty to talk to each other, and not just in the same discipline, but across campus. And, you get a bunch of faculty in a room and you ask them, well, what's going on in your class? How do you think you could improve your class? And, the ideas become overwhelming.
Yeah.
They've thought about it, but sometimes they don't know how to do it. Sometimes they are inhibited by doing it because they worry about what their colleagues who are going to vote on their tenure are going to say. So the university needs not just to support student success, university needs to support faculty.
Yeah.
If we don't give faculty the tools to help them become not just remarkable researchers, but remarkable teachers, then we are not serving faculty. And, we all know that the flight from academia has been rapid
Yeah.
in the last few years.
Yep.
Faculty feel unappreciated, they're overwhelmed, they're leaving the profession.
Yeah. And in supporting faculty, talk about a through line straight to faculty success, student success, our collective success. Can I ask really quick, why do you think we just historically haven't taken time to do what you suggest, which is pull all these folks together and put the question in front of them and just, and in some instance, if I hear you correctly, see what they come up with, and trust perhaps that they're going to come up with something that's going to be really amazing, right?
Well, I think we have to go back to the beginnings of universities,
Yeah.
which were created on a totally different model.
Yeah.
So we need to kind of forget some of the origin story.
Yeah.
And in the same way that we have to teach the students who are in our class, we have to nurture the faculty who are in our university.
Yeah.
And, it's a resource-strained environment, and convincing people to financially support what's needed for student success is a hard enough task. Then expanding that to faculty success, it's an even harder ask. I think one of the things that has happened in the last 20 years is the rise of teaching excellent centers, like your CET, with people who know how to train faculty to do different things in their courses and how to design a course. I remember when I first started teaching, it's like, well, pick the textbook, and then it's like this, steady march through the textbook, through all the content. Whose syllabus can I borrow? And we're thinking about getting through the semester and getting through the content, and we're not really thinking about how we're doing that. And those centers are key.
Yeah.
And designing a course in a way that's going to lead you to a much better learning environment for your students.
Awesome. Naomi, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Chase. It's been fun.
Always. Always. I'm grateful that you were willing to sit down and talk about some stuff. This, Naomi and I's, it's been many, many years of an ongoing conversation, of which this is a snapshot. And I'm grateful to you for it, for this snapshot and all those that have come before, and will keep going.
Yeah, well, you've been an incredible colleague. I think we've each learned a lot from each other.
God.
And just getting in the room and talking,
Yeah.
those sparks fly.
Yep.
And good ideas come up.
Yeah. Well, I am on the winning end of that, for sure.
Well, so am I.
All right. Well, thank you, Naomi. Thanks, viewers and listeners, for tuning in. This has been Together, a Higher Ed podcast. Join us next time.